think that Robert Saleh is the coach of the Jets next year? Because, in my opinion, the dude wasn't exactly given a fair shake. Now, Aaron Rodgers gets hurt on the fourth, play of the entire season. You have to go with Zach Wilson. The only blame that I have towards Saleh as the head coach is that he went with Zach Wilson too long. And I'm not sure if that was somebody above him or if he was the one who got to ultimately make that decision. But, bro, everybody in the world could watch their TV and see that this guy was not going to be either the short or the long-term answer, and they just stuck with him and cost themselves games. Now, we saw Tim Boyle a couple hours ago, and it didn't look a whole lot better, so I'm not sure that he exactly had a great option at quarterback. Because of that, I think Saleh gets another shot next season.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's hard to say how that all transpired behind the scenes, right? So you give him a little bit of pass because Aaron Rodgers gets hurt. Obviously, the reason you brought in Aaron Rodgers is so, he wouldn't have to make quarterback decisions, right? It's turnkey. You plug Rodgers into the lineup. You don't have to think about it. And then, all chaos breaks loose after a couple plays into the season, and he's back in the situation he was last year. Can they make the playoffs? Absolutely. They're 8-3. They're going to make the playoffs. They're going to win a division. They'll probably win a playoff game. They'll get the first one at home. They're going to get a Minnesota or a Seattle or a Green Bay or a team like that. They could certainly win that kind of game at home in the first round. But I don't think there's any kind of optimism after that, right? I don't see them going into San Francisco, going into Philadelphia, and be able to get a win with that defense. I mean, the defense is really the big concern. Seems like they got things figured out on offense, but you can't get torched like that against Jordan Love and expect to be, a conference championship contender.
Miami's losses are to Kansas City, Philadelphia, and Buffalo. Is there any concern that they just beat the bad teams and not the good ones?
It's definitely been a storyline for sure. It seems to be the thing that, when their offense got off to such a humming start and then it seems to sputter out, that's definitely been a narrative that has been around here, and the coach even talked about it. He goes, the narrative is what it's going to be until they can prove otherwise, and they really won't get a chance to prove otherwise until their last 3 games of the season when they take on Dallas, go to Baltimore, and then host the Bills because, they got a bunch of Commanders and Titans and Jets coming on up. So for right now, the Dolphins' only task is to keep fattening up that record. So it's not a problem and see if by some way they get to those last 3 games and maybe can get a hold of the 1 seed possible, because they definitely are a team that would love to get as many home games as possible in the playoffs.
Think they're dead. You tell me. The Buffalo Bills. Which way you swipe?
I'll swipe left. If we're talking about playoffs, I'm probably still swiping left. I don't think they make the playoffs this year. I think the team is unraveling. You're seeing Sean McDermott do the blame thing. That's always a bad sign. Just, the off-season stuff with Diggs and Allen. And then, Allen's banged up. But the defense is really terrible. One of the worst defenses in the league since Milano went down. So they got injuries on all 3 levels. Milano, Trey White acts on the back end. And they're just not able to overcome that. So, and what that does puts too much pressure on Josh Allen. Then he feels like he has to make some plays. Then you see the interceptions. It all starts to snowball. But they have Super Sports, ranks the teams by strength of schedule, before and after the current week. And they have the hardest strength of schedule left in the NFL. So they're a team that's skating on thin ice, and I think they're going to plunge into the cold waters.
It can, and I think it'll surface if they lose. But I think Ryan Day has done a very good job of answering some critics all year. I mean, and it really started at that Notre Dame game, a physical game that they win on the last play. They win a physical game with Penn State where they take care of business in that one. And so it really has been building to this moment. I don't think it's an issue. And it honestly, he probably should stay within himself emotionally. I know they wanted the fired up Ryan Day that we saw against Georgia, but to me, a just staying within himself, staying within their game plan, trusting a defense that hasn't allowed more than 17 points in a game all season, that will carry the day. And I really think this is an old school Big Ten game where 1 turnover, maybe 2, could make the difference. It's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. I'm driving up there now. I don't like this weather. I grew up in it, but it's going to be a good one.
I think there's probably some Cowboy fans that are driving around right now that are like, hold on, Did this dude see what we did yesterday? Has this dude seen how good Dak Prescott has been this season? And need I remind you that this is nothing new. Besides the Kansas City Chiefs, Dallas has won more regular season games now over the last 2+ years than any other team in the NFL. Are they not legit?
Yeah, so this is my message to Cowboys fans or people who are thinking about betting the Cowboys in the futures market. You don't play the Commanders in the playoffs. Like, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get to play, these bottom barrel teams. You have to punch up, and they're going to have to beat elite teams. And they just don't seem to be able to do that. And I haven't seen anything from McCarthy this year to make me think that's going to change.
So what's the difference between, Mark, a team like that and a team like Miami, whose losses came to Kansas City and Buffalo and Philadelphia? Like, if you're telling me Dallas can't beat a good team, then I look at Miami and go, all right, either can they.
Well, because it's not something that's been happening. I mean, it's a fair question. It's a really fair question. And basically what it comes down to for me, it's a personal preference, right? In the sense that I have more confidence in Mike McDaniel on the sidelines in those situations and Vic Fangio, them breaking the years of history of Miami's failures in the playoffs, than I do Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn doing it with this group of Dallas Cowboys, these group of players, Dak Prescott, who I've been watching for, close to a decade, not be able to get it done, that sort of thing. So I think it's a different thing in the sense of where we might have not seen it from the coach, with Dallas, but we've seen it with these players not being able to come through. With Miami, it's a new regime, it's new young players, it's exciting dynamic, the team's built differently, and I have a lot more confidence in McDaniel than I do McCarthy, and I think that's really where it comes from.
The two quarterbacks that I think their narrative can change based on what they do in this postseason the most, Dak Prescott and Trevor Lawrence. I think Dak Prescott, as you mentioned, he's been around long enough where it's like, all right, man, you can win in the regular season. You can put up a bunch of good stats. Can you beat a good team? Can you beat a good team in the playoffs? Can you beat a good team in the playoffs on the road? And then if you do all that, then we'll start to call you elite or pretty close to it. But until then, you're just another guy. And in the case of Trevor Lawrence, he hasn't been around quite as long. Obviously drafted higher #1 pick a couple of years ago, which means higher expectations. I would say easier division in the AFC South to win. Both those guys, Mark, depending on what they do in the postseason. Like, if Trevor Lawrence gets to the postseason and loses right away in the first round like he does last year, I think a lot of people are going to go, he's cool, he's good, but he's not great. Never really going to do much in the NFL. Maybe he'll win 10, 11 games, but not going to ever win. Basically what Dak Prescott has been. Both these guys have the ability to completely change their narrative if they can take their teams deep.
Yeah, it's almost like, can they get out of that zone, that like Kirk Cousins zone of, players that are good, have great careers, but just haven't been able to break through and be that elite player or carry.
I put Lamar Jackson in there too. Not individually, but as far as being able to advance deep in the playoffs, same thing for him. Put up or shut up time, man.
Yeah, I agree 100%, especially with this team around them. Like, this is a huge year for Lamar Jackson. Like, if they go one and done in the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of questions about, whether they should have gave him the money and him being the future. Personally, I believe in him. We'll see. Obviously, it's going to depend on what happens on the field. But, yeah, no, it's an excellent point. And, I think that's the key. With Lawrence, I feel like the narrative, if they're one and done in the playoffs, is going to be that, it was last year just a little bit of a fluke because they snuck up on people. Peterson's first year, nobody expected them, and now that the film's out there, they know what they're about offensively, they can shut that down. But to me, again, I just think they're an incomplete team. The offensive line is not good, and I think that's eventually going to be their Achilles heel from, going really deep in the playoffs and what should be a very competitive AFC. But the beauty of it is it really comes down to matchups. Styles make fights in the playoffs. So,
sure.
How these seedings turn out. This is my favorite time of the year, is these teams kind of jockey for position, not intentionally, but jockey for position to see how the puzzle pieces fit, because the playoff matches, like your path there is huge.
I'm curious to see how the style plays out in the fight between these two teams, Jacksonville and